This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move straight on to the final section of our keynote speech. And it's an enormous privilege to be able to welcome, to introduce Senator Hugh Segal. Hugh is a distinguished and long-serving Canadian politician and a prominent commentator on Canadian TV and in the press. He was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2005 by Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin and served as chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He was therefore presumably more at ease than I was earlier in the year when he gave evidence before our House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee in its inquiry into the future of the Commonwealth. But it's significant that the Foreign Affairs Committee chose to call Hugh as their first witness. He was a member of the Commonwealth Eminent Persons Group, and in November 2011, the federal government appointed him as Special Envoy to the Commonwealth. It's an enormous privilege to have him here today, and we're particularly grateful to him because this is his sort of second consecutive speech in 2 days for us. He spoke at our Commonwealth reform event yesterday. We're extremely grateful. So, Hugh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. I'm going to try to speak as loud as I can because having sat in the second to last row and having had great difficulty hearing some of the most wonderful and thoughtful speakers, I thought I would try to be a little bit more projective, shall we say, relative to those folks who are sitting where I'm sitting. Now, Philip, thank you for the warm introduction. It's great to be part of this session, and I do want to say a word of thanks to the Commonwealth Advisory Board for organizing an absolutely fascinating engagement, not only in terms of the people who spoke from the front table, but the triangulation with people in the room, which I think is a very important part of the process. I learned a great deal today from all of the speakers and from all of the questions, and I'm appreciative of that opportunity. What I'd like to do while reflecting on some of the discussions we've had here today is offer a view about the future of the Commonwealth Sri Lanka engagement over the next 12 months and beyond. Let me start by indicating that I will not be offering an uninformed view on recent Sri Lankan history. While I have been to countries in the region such as Bangladesh and Malaysia and Singapore and India, I have no direct experience in Sri Lanka. In my own view, situations that have contested and complex histories, especially those that involve violence on both sides, are not aided by analysis that is neither expert nor rooted in real experience on the ground. So I will leave that analysis to those more qualified to offer it. Humility in the face of complexity is, in this context, I think, constructive. The context that I will embrace is what the most constructive role the Commonwealth, its members, and the Secretary General can play over the coming year and beyond, in the interest of both Commonwealth values and in the interest of the people of Sri Lanka. And anything other, in my view, than a highly engaged, activist, and forceful Secretary General in the next 12 months on Sri Lanka would be a serious denial of the Harare Declaration, which of course is fundamental to Commonwealth values. As Amitav Banerjee of the Commonwealth Secretariat said at another conference in this room yesterday, and Amitav is one of those people for whom I have the highest regard, one cannot observe recent reports of the UN Human Rights Council, the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee here in the UK, and this week's UN report on the comportment of its own observers during difficult and violent times, without understanding the increasing and intense complexity of this issue and what may be facing the Commonwealth in the coming 12 months. And being frank with ourselves about that and those difficulties, I think, is the first sign of wisdom. Let me just say that my Prime Minister's position, which was cited by the House of Commons Committee, and which was articulated in August of 2011 in response to media questions, was essentially that he did not feel comfortable agreeing to go to Colombo unless he saw some further indication of engagement on some of the issues that had been raised. That was not a politically planned execution, that was a response to a media question. He didn't make the statement because he thought our influence as Canadians in Sri Lankan politics was substantial. He didn't make the statement because he was trying to get other Commonwealth countries to decide not to go. He didn't even say that Canada would not go. He merely said that he had difficulty contemplating going to Colombo under the present circumstances. And certainly, my mission as a Special Envoy for Commonwealth Renewal has not been to encourage other Commonwealth countries, as we speak, to boycott the meeting in Colombo. That is not part of my remit, nor am I doing so. Let me quote a release put out recently by the South African Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Ibrahim, who with a civil society delegation met with the Sri Lankan government, the Tamil community, and NGO officials this past August. And I quote, "The South African government has always believed that the domestic accountability issues must first and foremost be sought at the national level, and there should be demonstrable and concrete effort and movement in that regard." And the release from the South African government went on to say, "A durable and lasting peace would come about in Sri Lanka when the reconciliation process is underscored by a truly inclusive dialogue process that addresses the rights and freedoms of the Tamil community, has the support of the international community, and of all Sri Lankans within and outside the country." Close quote. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission was about South Africa and does not necessarily adapt itself automatically to other countries or circumstances. But the mature sentiment in favor of building the Rainbow Nation and moving ahead with its imperfections is still a beacon for the rest of the Commonwealth to reflect on as other countries and Commonwealth brothers and sisters negotiate similar and difficult transitional challenges. I commend South Africa and the Deputy Minister for the intervention and the statement. His country, more than most others, understands difficult transitions. South Africa, during and through the end of apartheid, lived a transition that was helped by the Commonwealth Secretary General of the day, Sonny Rampal, a distinguished and eminent persons group who, amongst other things, visited Robbins Island and played a serious role in Commonwealth and frontline sanctions. South Africa is now using that painful, remarkable, liberating, and courageous history to offer constructive assistance to Sri Lanka as it seeks to move on after a period of terrorist violence and violence generally on both sides. That is an engagement on the part of South Africa that the engagement on the part of South Africa embraces accountability. It is hopeful in the extreme. Accountability is a vital exigency when violence was so widespread and transition is being sought. The sort of collaboration between South Africa and Sri Lanka is to be supported and encouraged by all Commonwealth nations. Sri Lanka could have no better source of advice and counsel as it charts its sovereign course. Every citizen of the Commonwealth should be grateful for Sri Lanka's outreach to South Africa and South Africa's valuable engagement. This is the Commonwealth working at its best. The Commonwealth has a role to play in this pre-Chogan year. It is not the role of supplicant, fellow traveler, or defender. It is a role which, while centered on the Secretary General, is not limited to the Secretary General. CMAG, with new terms of reference given to it uniformly by all members of the Commonwealth at the post-Chogan meeting, has a role to play whenever core violations, serious violations of Commonwealth values, principles, and historical commitments is being put before it. Whatever the disputed aspects of the violence and terror in recent years in Sri Lanka, both leading up to 2009 and thereafter, there are a few core realities I don't think the Commonwealth can ignore. Number one, whatever the excesses that occurred on both sides of the terrorism and the violence and what many have called a civil war, the issue of a framework of accountability cannot be set aside forever. The longer both sides of the dispute are denied this framework, the more evidence of excess will be lost, and the more difficult accountability and closure will be. And these are essential for any society to move on from this period of difficulty, especially one that has gone through this much violence. In the case of the lead up to children, the initiation by Sri Lanka of credible accountability processes may in fact be vital. And here the Commonwealth should offer to help technically in terms of representational presence any way it can. B, in those areas where the government of Sri Lanka does deserve fair-minded credit, such as inviting the UNHCR Commissioner, the UNHC Commissioner, and a team of human rights experts to visit, the work of the Sri Lankan LLRC, the translation of the LLRC report into Sinhala and Tamil, excellent work on demining areas for settlement and serious development and reconstruction progress, let me offer as a friend of the people of Sri Lanka frank advice that the perception of inaction on many fronts, justified or not, is not helped by a policy of hunkering down. There should be, with respect to decisions taken and progress yet to be made, a robust disclosure and information policy on the part of the Sri Lankans. It would be in the interest of all Sri Lankans that that policy be active in the next 12 months. C, the Commonwealth, in any of its private, public, CMAG, or other instruments, cannot be a silent, go along to get along observer in this process. No Commonwealth country, including my own, lacks in imperfections or some measure of democratic deficit. To suggest otherwise of Sri Lanka in the run-up to Chogam is to do Sri Lanka and the Commonwealth a disservice. The challenge here, surely, is for a sure-footed and very public Commonwealth to embrace a program built together with Sri Lanka in mutual respect and full recognition of both Sri Lanka's sovereignty and core Commonwealth values. This must set out a roadmap to Colombo next November, of which both the Sri Lankan government and the Commonwealth can be proud, and which underlines that the Commonwealth does not sacrifice principle for convenience. And as the host of Chogam 2013, our Sri Lankan friends, being a sophisticated and long-standing Commonwealth democracy within the Commonwealth family, should understand the very important difference between principle and convenience. We have further thresholds to address in the coming months, some of which were helpfully referenced in the previous panel, including the UNHR final report on Sri Lanka, scheduled for March of 2013. The Commonwealth, as a trusted partner and volunteer association of 54 sovereign states, cannot whistle through the tulips and hope that there will be no bumps in the road. In this regard, I very much welcome the Secretary General's statement of earlier today expressing profound concern over the efforts to impeach the Chief Justice of Sri Lanka. There is more on this front that will be necessary in the future. The hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil option no longer exists. The new terms of reference and focused remit on Commonwealth values embraced unanimously at Perth for the Commonwealth Ministerial Action Group explicitly calls for consideration of serious breaches that threaten around the rule of law, democracy, fairness, and human rights. The Chogam event coming in November, 12 months exactly from yesterday, creates no off-ramp for the attending nations planning to be at Colombo. No off-ramp for the Commonwealth Secretary General or an off-ramp for our host government in Sri Lanka. We should not back away from controversy or seek to obfuscate sincerely held concerns within the Commonwealth or the UN. Honesty, principle, joint engagement, and robust standards are our best tools in a constructive diplomacy of purpose between today and CHOGM 2013. Diplomacy that is only about process and avoiding unpleasantness is a disservice both to the Commonwealth and to the people and government of Sri Lanka. The good people of Sri Lanka deserve more, as do the core values and principles of the Commonwealth itself. Cooperation and mutual trust between Commonwealth members is also about frankness and clarity. It is frankness and clarity that will enhance the capacity of CHOGM and its hosts next year to move ahead in a way that strengthens both. Looking away from hard truths, from facts on the ground, and accountability frameworks serves no purpose and creates no better future for the peoples of the Commonwealth. Every CHOGM, the preparatory work that goes into it, the commitments made by the host government, the principles and values that underline these commitments are about a future that is brighter for the peoples of the Commonwealth, including those of the host country. Setting that imperative aside, as I am sure neither our Sri Lankan hosts or their Commonwealth colleagues wish to see happen, would be the ultimate abdication and overwhelming desertion of a vital and promising opportunity. And that is the outcome we must avoid at all costs. I'm in your hands for questions or personal attacks. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Segal very kindly agreed to take questions, and we have until 10 to 4. I'm sure a lot of people will want to ask something, so please keep your questions brief and to the point. The floor is open. Patsy.
Senator Segal, you spoke about a roadmap. Who will develop it? Will Canada take the lead, or will you expect the Secretariat to come up with something that it would send to all governments in order to make it possible to put the pressure that's needed on Sri Lanka?
Actually, in a perfect world, the Secretary General would develop a roadmap concurrently with our Sri Lankan Commonwealth members and attempt to come to a roadmap that addresses what would be Sri Lanka's concern about its own sovereignty, understandably, but also Commonwealth concerns about issues around, for example, accountability that need to be addressed. My view would be that if the Secretary General reached that agreement and there was some robustness to it, he could send that to all members of the Commonwealth who would be quite delighted to be supportive. Failing that, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the possibility that one of the members of CMAG will ask that the matter be put on the agenda formally? And CMAG meets in April, but there can be extraordinary meetings. There were several extraordinary meetings on the Maldives. And were that to transpire, then the roadmap might be something that is considered by all the countries on CMAG, and in that context would take longer to develop, but may have a slightly broader base. My preference would be leadership from the Secretary General. There is a tradition of that kind of leadership in the past. Other Secretary Generals, and I think if he went that route, he would be doing great work both for our Sri Lankan friends and for the Commonwealth itself. Please. Yeah.
So, Frank Carter from the Sri Lanka campaign. Thank you very much for that very interesting speech. Sri Lanka's records of sort of pulling the wool over the eyes of the international community is quite good. I'm afraid to say there was a sort of example of it there when you congratulated Sri Lanka on translating the Lessons Learned from Reconciliation Commission into Sinhala and Tamil, which took something like a year and a half, like far longer than it ever should have taken for a very basic mechanism. Now, in that light, I just wonder if you're sort of enthusiastic welcoming of the bilateral relationship between South Africa and Sri Lanka. Is there not a danger that this is more whitewash, more smoke and mirrors?
There are many things I would accuse the South Africans of. The term whitewash would never ever have heard of. Number one. And number two, I think that I know from various contacts with our South African friends that they're very sincere in their presence. They don't believe they don't believe that they are being manipulated or they wish to be manipulated. Quite the contrary. And in any negotiation between two countries, where there are issues of pride and substance and intellectual content and sovereignty involved. There'll be give and take, and there'll be good moments and bad moments. But I'm hopeful that the initiative undertaken by the South Africans will continue. And I think we have to be frank about those countries in the Commonwealth that may have more influence in Colombo, and those countries in the Commonwealth who for various reasons have less influence in Colombo. South Africa has immense influence in Colombo. My country, not very much. So understanding that reality, I think, is instructive.
So Segal, you spoke with a touch of sincerity, which is very welcome. And I wonder, when you are the resident of Canada, whether you hear a lot of things about the country, whether that is statistically correct, because invariably the various groups who are enumerating and speaking English and resident in Western countries, by far the Tamil groups outnumber the majority community in Sri Lanka, Muslims or Sinhalese. So invariably what you hear is a very distorted sense, and also that is borne out by the massive fundraising exercises you may here you are unaware of by the Tamil community. So how do you bring fairness to this? I mean, if you are doing any adjudication of the process.
Very fair question. And I think it touches in some measure upon the very robust Sri Lankan diaspora in my country, which is largely Tamil. We had a very brave High Commissioner in Colombo by the name of Ruth Archibald. And when the Prime Minister, who appointed me, I'm not of his party, he's a Liberal, I'm a Conservative, but when he appointed me, when he was running for the job of Prime Minister, of course, he was attending meetings all over the country and endeavoring to get funds raised for his campaign. It's the nature of the beast. And one group that wanted to organize a fundraising event for him was identified by our High Commissioner in Colombo as an unacceptable source of funding because of its linkage to various terrorist undertakings going on in various parts of Sri Lanka. And she had the courage, for a diplomat this is quite substantial, to send a dispatch back saying, please do not let the finance minister, which he was then, be a guest of these people, because my engagement with the government in Sri Lanka indicates that these people are part of a network that is funding terrorism. And she got moved from Colombo to become our High Commissioner in South Africa, where she did a very distinguished job. Canada was the very first to put the LTTE on its terrorist list. And in fact, if you look at the Tamil diaspora, which is a very robust, activist part of the Canadian family, they tend not to vote for the present Prime Minister's party. In numbers to speak of, they vote for the Liberal Party or the Social Democratic Party. They tend not to vote. So there is no direct at home political linkage between what my Prime Minister said, how we read the issues, and the diaspora community and their engagement on many, many questions. Canada tends to take the view of organizations like the UN Human Rights Council and various others who've engaged because the people in that room will have more expertise than we will. We will put our own questions, which we did. We'll make our own recommendations, which were summarily ignored by the present Sri Lankan administration. So we will do our best to participate, but we understand that Sri Lanka is not an area where we have either great expertise or where we have significant influence. So our position is one of doing what we think is fair and right and being honest about it, and hoping that the process can move to a constructive solution where the roadmap is seen to be one where progress has been made on critical issues and where Commonwealth values and the sovereign relationship between the government of Sri Lanka and its 53 brothers and sisters in the Commonwealth is actually strengthened through the process.
There are quite a few questions, so I beg people to keep their questions brief. Yes, please, you had your hand up.
I am shocked at what people are saying about South Africa. After the foreign minister, Sri Lankan foreign minister went to South Africa in May and had discussion with the South African counterpart, and she said something about, oh, we can help you with reconciliation. And when he got back home, he was forced to say that, oh, I am not going to listen to that. That is the situation in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
It's very complicated.
Thank you very much. We'll take two or three more questions and then you can respond. Please, sir.
Senator, I mean, it sounds wonderful that the Secretary General will be able to agree on a roadmap with the government of Sri Lanka. But,
Well, I'm hopeful of that. I have no indication that will happen. I'm really saying I'd like to see that happen.
but am I right in thinking that the 2011 CHOGM was meant to be held in Sri Lanka, but that was held in Perth instead because it was felt it was inappropriate at the time, and it's come up again that it's going to be held in Sri Lanka. So are there perhaps some business interests behind this determination to have it held in Colombo, given that the Commonwealth Business Council is quite a big event in any CHOGM summit? I think in 2009 in Trinidad, several $1 billion worth of business deals were done. So whilst I'd like to think human rights is the main driving force here, could you enlighten us, maybe do you see business interests perhaps derailing this this human rights agenda?
I'll take one more question and then William, you go ahead.
In the light of, my name is William Crawley, I'm the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, in the light of the very different instances in which the international community has or has not intervened to protect minorities or for other reasons, do you expect the Commonwealth discussions next year to focus on more general issues of the right to protect, or more general issues of the right to intervene, aside from whatever the history of Sri Lanka might be? Because that was the basic fear of Sri Lanka, and it's probably the basic fear of many of the African and Asian countries who would support their view.
I'll deal with your question first and then come to our colleague's question. I believe the thematic for the meeting in Colombo around broadening the economic base and encouraging more people into the economic mainstream and the gaps between rich and poor has already been chosen. So to the extent there's any creative discussion, that will be, I think, the main thrust. That does not, however, in any way limit what the leaders discuss in their retreat. One of my great regrets about CHOGMs generally is that in the days of the earlier days of the Commonwealth, and I think of Sonny Rampell, Arnold Smith, and others, it actually was a meeting of leaders, not huge staffs and diplomats and not official opening ceremonies and people in funny costumes and all that. It was actually a very frank discussion between leaders where relationships were built, where frankness could exist because it was largely relatively private. And then people, I can think of Mr. Trudeau coming home to Canada after one of those meetings and saying, you may not know this, but we're going to help the Tanzanians build a railway. Nobody knew it, and certainly none of his diplomats knew it, but that was the kind of discussion. And I think some of that in international affairs between countries north, south, and others is actually of some value. Canada takes quite a position of pride on the responsibility to protect, because it was our minister, Lloyd Axworthy, who is part of a commission for the Secretary General of the UN, put the idea first forward, and it then got adopted by the UN. And many of our international activities, Libya, for example, as part of a NATO task force, was really built upon the responsibility to protect, in that case, a civilian population that was going to be bombed to smithereens by their own Air Force and by their own armed forces. So nothing would make me happier if the Commonwealth found a way to discuss what responsibility to protect means in the context of an association that is by definition not about security, but about other critical issues. And it's always been my view that there are organizations worldwide that are about trauma. NATO's about trauma. Security Council's about trauma. It's when things go terribly wrong, you have to engage at this other more Machiavellian level. But there are organizations that are about preventing trauma, about helping with development and education and governance and democracy and freedom. And the Commonwealth, in my view, is the best internationally balanced group with countries of different backgrounds and political affiliations and racial and historic origins working together in a preventative way to keep society strong, give people a real opportunity to progress. So I would hope that they would find a way, and what is discussed amongst the leaders in the private retreat is for them to determine. There's no prefix on that. So I'm optimistic that there will be some salience for that. I don't want to be unkind to the Commonwealth Business Council, but I don't know of any leader in any government in any Commonwealth country who wakes up in the morning, turns to either his wife or her husband or her spouse or significant other and says, I wonder what the Commonwealth Business Council is doing today. I don't think it happens, and well, to be sure, any country where there's going to be a CHOGM and the Commonwealth Business Council comes along, as does the People's Commonwealth, the Youth Commonwealth, and other things, begin to plan on how to maximize the benefits of showing the country to potential investors, I don't know that that would be a determining factor here. And in the circumstance that something jarring happens in March, certain words appear in March that have yet to appear, and the decision is taken to reconsider whether one can actually go forward to Colombo. I don't know that that will happen, but if it did, I can reassure you that the views of the Commonwealth Business Council will not even be taken into consideration in that discussion, for better or for worse.
Very much. Final round of questions, please.
Right, thank you for that wonderful speech, and thank you for the Canadian Prime Minister taking the lead on Sri Lanka. My question is that you mentioned about the Truth Commission that Abraham is leading on behalf of South Africa. But what happened in South Africa is not anywhere similar or parallel to what's happening in Sri Lanka. The international community agrees that the justice accountability should be done for the injustice done for the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. And this Truth Commission doesn't go to that extent. But a lot of the international community, even UK MPs and Parliament, Foreign Affairs Select Committees, feel that this is that sort of reconciliation thing would not do for Sri Lanka. Having looked at for the past 60 years, Sri Lanka not delivered any of its own commissions. Impunity in Sri Lanka is quite common. Can you tell me why, South Africa and the Commonwealth looking at that direction?
Well, I don't think I said that, actually. I think what I said was that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was appropriate for South Africa.
Right.
And is not necessarily adaptable everywhere else. I think I did say that as clearly as I could. But my suspicion would be that the dialogue, and I don't know because I wasn't there, but the dialogue between senior South African officials and senior Sri Lankan officials, as well as members of the Tamil community and others, would be, how did yours work? What were its strengths? What were its weaknesses? So a lot of academic work has been done on that. What would apply here? What would not apply here? What can we learn from what went right, and what can we learn from areas that were not addressed in the TRC, so that we can think about what's an appropriate accountability structure here, certainly from Canada's perspective. And I think from the Commonwealth perspective overall, the issue of accountability has to be A, appropriate for Sri Lanka, and that's a broad definition, and B, it can't be avoided. That would be our ingoing bias in any of the discussions that might ensue around how that might end up being doing. But in the end, it is for the Sri Lankan government to decide, and for Commonwealth friends and colleagues around the table to offer assistance and put some lead in the pencil of the Secretariat as we move forward on that question.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time. I'm going to ask my colleague Jason Cooper to come up in a second and make some concluding remarks. But before I do, let us offer our thanks again to Senator Segal for an excellent